Hey guys, it's Jenna. Welcome back to my channel today. In today's video, I'm going to be chatting about the new Natasha Denona Mini Xenon palette. This is her latest mini. It just launched, I think, the other day, so I was able to get this lightning fast to do a first impression for you guys today, and this one is interesting. Gave me some interesting mixed feelings for sure. So I'm gonna preface this video by letting you guys know this is based on my palette, my skill level, as well as my interpretation of Natasha Denona's other formulas. So we're gonna talk about all of that today. If you're new here, my name is Jenna. I am a high-end and luxury makeup lover and reviewer, and Natasha Denona is a brand that I review everything from. I love her brand. I love her eyeshadows in particular. So I was really excited to see such a smoky palette. Now, this is one initially that I was like, oh, this is really, really dark. I don't know if this is something I'm gonna like, but interesting how this look came out. So let's talk about all the details about this palette and whether or not I think it's worth your money or not. First off, I always talk about packaging, so let's talk about the outer packaging. The outer packaging is very similar to the rest of her minis. We do have the Natasha Denona labeling with Mini Xenon palette underneath. It is a 5 eyeshadow palette, 0.8 grams per shade. And then on the back of it, it does have all of the shades listed on the palette, all of the ingredients that you need to know. And it also has a tiny little legend of what the shades are called. So that's perfect when it comes to following tutorials. If you have shade names, it helps a lot to keep everything organized so you know where you're at step by step. Natasha Denona's minis run $25 US or 33 Canadian dollars. I always include the Canadian price because I am Canadian myself. And just so you guys know, if you do order from Natasha Denona's website coming to Canada, you are potentially going to get hit with duties and taxes because she does have her palettes made abroad in Italy. And if you ship them over the border, you're going to have some duties and taxes involved. So luckily for this one, I ordered this one from the Natasha Denona website, did not get duties or taxes this time, probably because of the price tag. It wasn't as high as some of the other palettes I've purchased from her website. Or I could be getting a bill from FedEx later on, which is most likely going to happen. Anyways, this is a 24-month shelf life for the palette, and it is made in Italy. It is paraben-free, not tested on animals. This palette you can get, like I said, at the website of Natasha Denona's makeup brand. You can also get it at Sephora now, US and Canada. You can also get it on Beautylish. Now this is going to be a very quick and concise review based on my first impressions of this palette, and of course I'm going to do further testing and follow up in the hits and misses when I've used it more than the one time, but this is just the first time I've used it. And for the look today, I really wanted to get all of the shades basically on my lid, and this is something that is such a cohesive palette. I knew I could get all of the shades in one shot, so I was able to test all 5 of them. First of all, before all of that, I did prime with, of course, my Smashbox 24-hour eyeshadow primer. I mention this in every video I do eyeshadow because it's just my favorite. And I did get a comment one time saying, are you sponsored with Smashbox or something? Like, there are other primers out there, Jenna. And I just love this one. So no, not sponsored, but Smashbox, if you're interested, I'm interested. Once that primer's set, it's super easy to apply. It's really a nice, light beige, creamy consistency, and it just tends to even out any and all texture on your lid. As you can tell, my eye shape is hooded, so I do have some creases, some crevices to work with. It's a little bit interesting to apply shadow to a hooded lid versus a lid that's not hooded, but I like to prime every time just so that it's all nice and smooth and moisturized. Then I went in with the first shade. So way over on this side, this is the shade called Puff. Puff is a matte. It actually does seem to translate a little bit powdery, but I did apply it, in my opinion, relatively easy. I did use a Wayne Goss number 18. This is a natural haired eyeshadow brush. It's one of my favorite sets, and basically I went in all over the lid with this particular brush. When you pick up the product in pan, you will get quite a bit of kick up actually. So it could speak to the fact that these are very fluffy, natural haired brushes that are kind of disturbing the powder in the pan, or it could just be the fact that this is a lightweight powder and it's free to be airborne pretty easily. Based on how it translated on the lid, I would say medium to full opacity right away. I did find I had to layer it a couple of times to really get that entire full pigment payoff on the eyelid. Next, I went in with the light blue. This is kind of like a bluey gray. It's actually one of my favorite mattes in this palette. So it's actually right here. This is the shade Mist. Mist is a matte as well, like I said, and this one I found to be a little more creamy than the Puff shade. The Puff shade is powdery with not that much cream to it. The Mist shade has a little bit more creaminess yet. So right off the bat, that was the first difference I noticed between these two mattes. The Mist shade also required a couple of layers, and you can see that it does tend to add a little bit more to this look. The Puff look is actually much more on the white side than I thought it would be, so I added that blue to get a little bit more depth all over the lid there. The brush I use for this shade is Wayne Goss number 16. It's actually the biggest eye brush he uses, so I really wanted to get a fluffy all over the lid look with this shade. Next, I wanted to start working on the smokiness that's on the outer portion of this look. So you can see this is actually quite almost editorial for me. You know that if you've watched me for a little while, dark colors like this are not in my comfort zone, but I do like how it amplifies brown eyes. So these are really gorgeous, like icy gray, very smoky tones. So this next shade here is called Gloom. Gloom is a really interesting kind of gray deep blue, and it's also a matte. This is one that actually is more on the drier side in my personal opinion, and when I applied it with my small Wayne Goss brush, this is the Wayne Goss number 20, I did do this with a nice detailed brush on purpose because it is quite pigment heavy and it's a deep shade. So it sort of alludes to any mistakes really quickly when you have a deeper shade, especially when you're trying to smoke out the corner like that. And I also have a hooded lid, so it's a little bit more of a tricky situation when you apply smoky looks to the outer edge. So this is one that I actually found translated really well on the lid, but I will say opacity-wise, a little bit weaker than the other two mattes. I would say for this one that for the purposes of my look, it did a good job of translating very well, but I found I had to be a little bit more patient with blending for this one. Not like it's a dud shade per se, but it definitely required a little bit more attention to detail. It's deep in color, of course, so I wanted to make sure it looked as even as possible, but also I noticed a little bit of stiffness within this formula. Now I had to go in with this sparkly shade. I'm very attracted to shimmers. I just love putting shimmer on my lid, on all of my looks basically. You rarely see me with a all matte look in my opinion. So this is the middle shade here. It's called Chromatic. Chromatic, in my opinion, is the strongest shade in this palette. It is very, very creamy, incredibly rich. That Natasha Denona quality that I'm used to in her shimmers. It's almost like a slight wetness. It's so creamy. And I applied it all over the lid with a fingertip because I wanted to get the most pigment impact. And this did a great job. I didn't even see very much fallout, if at all. And typically with some shimmers, I'm not always seeing that with Natasha's formula. Usually she does a really good job of keeping fallout fairly under control. And this is one that also did the same. It didn't seem to fall very much at all, maybe the tiniest little fleck here and there on my cheek, but I didn't even notice hardly anything when it came to fallout. It is so beautifully easy to apply, and it just adds that really nice drama and that sparkle on the look that I'm looking for. Now I wanted to try the black. This is called Blackest Black, and it's over here. It's also a matte. So Blackest Black is an interesting one because I used a pencil brush for this on purpose because I really wanted to have the most control possible. I wanted to add a teeny bit of black on the tip here of the look. So for that purpose, it did an absolutely fine job because it's basically placing very little pigment on the look. But we're going to get to swatches soon, and I'll tell you guys that there's a kind of an interesting thing with this shade. I don't really like it as much as the other black that she has done. She's done an amazing black in the Natasha Denona Biba palette. So Biba is a really gorgeous all-neutral palette, and the black here is called Spot. Spot is a cream to powder formulation, so it is different than the matte in the mini Xenon palette, but this one just It's so, so much better. I'll actually show you guys. This is one swipe of each of the shades. On the left, we have the Natasha Denona Mini Xenon. On the right, we have the Biba Black, which is Spot. You can see that one swipe, there's no comparison. The Blackest Black matte on a swatch performs very, very poorly. It almost looks like it's sort of crumbly in nature and really, really dry. Upon second look of the back of this palette here, I should clarify that the Blackest Black matte that I just talked about is a matte, but according to her legend here on the back, supposedly the other 3 shades that I applied already, so Puff, the Mist shade, which is that light blue, as well as Gloom, are all supposedly her cream to powder formulation, according to the labeling on the back, but I'm gonna be honest, they kind of are a little different across the board. Like Puff is actually quite powdery and not so creamy. It's a little creamy, but not that much. This one is better yet, which is Mist. Mist has a little bit more creaminess, but when I think of her cream to powder formulation, I think of Spot from Biba. Like that's one of my favorites. Whereas these ones in this mini palette here, I don't know, that's why I thought of them as matte right away, because they don't seem to have that same creaminess to them. And there's an interesting variation between the shades. So I think Gloom, I don't know, Gloom over here isn't even as creamy as Mist. So we have Mist as the creamiest. I would say probably Puff would be the second creamiest. This one, Gloom, is probably third. You can see all the swatches here fully in this palette. Going from left to right, we have Blackest Black, which is the matte, Gloom, which is the cream to powder, supposedly, Chromatic, which is that gorgeous shimmer, Mist, which is also a cream to powder, and Puff, which is a cream to powder. But as I was swatching them, there's very distinct differences between these shades, actually. Blackest Black being the driest, crumbliest, had to build up that swatch immensely. Gloom is also one I had to build up. It definitely had a little bit of a creamy aspect. I could kind of see where she was going with that, but it certainly isn't to the same caliber of the cream to powder formulation I'm used to. Does it give the purpose, though, of getting your look how you want it to look? Sure. But I think if you're using Gloom all over the lid or the black all over the lid, you're going to see those discrepancies a lot easier because you have much more of an area to work with. It's going to amplify any and all issues with that shade a lot easier than just applying it on the corner of the eye. Definitely the strongest shade in this palette, like I mentioned earlier, is Chromatic by far. It is by far the strongest shade, and for my purposes with this palette, this is kind of where I'm getting to. Is it worth it or not? It depends on what shade you're the most excited about in this palette. If you're the most excited about the deeper shades over here, I'm going to say you're probably going to be a little bit let down or a little bit disappointed, especially if you have some Natasha Denona formulation experience. You probably will notice the dryness and how they swatch is just so poor, but that doesn't mean that they apply poor. I mean, they apply for the purposes of having a nice corner shadow. Fine. You have to build up, you have to blend a little bit more. For application-wise for a smoke, not too bad. When it comes to all over the lid though, like I said, I can see the discrepancies being a lot easier to spot. When it comes to this shade here, we do have some icy shimmers in a lot of other palettes that we have, I'm sure. So this is one where if you just want kind of like a grab and go palette with some of these shades here, these are the shades that I'm going to personally be using a lot more. If I use a palette like this, it's going to be exactly like how I structured it today. It's certainly not going to be a black all over the lid or a deep, gray blue all over the lid. Mostly going to be concentrated with these 3 shades here. So for me and my purposes, I can absolutely use this palette. But I do think when it comes to quality overall, it's a little bit disappointing that there's quite a jump with certain formulations. And I do think she's done mattes a lot better in the past. And the cream to powder for sure, she's done a lot better in the past. There's a little bit of some discrepancies there with really how strong some of these shades are. This collection also includes potted liners as well as pencil liners. So if you are interested in that, there are 2 shades of the potted eyeliner. We have black, we have brown. Sorry, there's 3. Black, brown, and nude. And we also have crayon liners as well. There's black, brown, and burgundy in this. So there are some options here with this collection, not just the palette, but for me, the palette was the only thing that really stood out. So I happened to grab this for my first impressions today. If you've tried this palette, please let me know your thoughts. This really could just be speaking to my palette because sometimes there's manufacturing difficulties. So perhaps Mine is just not as strong as some other ones. I would love to know down below what your experience is with this palette. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful, and do consider subscribing if you are interested in more Natasha Denona palette reviews as well as other high-end and luxury makeup. Until my next one, guys, take care and stay safe. Bye, guys.